day, and welcome to the Airlines for America Economic Review and Summer Air Travel Forecast conference call. As a reminder, today's call is being recorded. If you would like to ask a question during the presentation, please do so by pressing the digit 1 followed by the digit 4 on your touch-tone telephone. If you're using a speakerphone, please make sure your mute function is turned off to allow your signal to reach the equipment. At this time, I would like to turn the conference over to Steve Lott, Vice President of Communications. Please go ahead, sir.
Good morning and thank you. Welcome everybody to the Airlines for America Quarterly Economics Review. Thanks for joining us this morning. There are several things we plan to cover today on our call. First, we're going to have our Chief Economist, John Heimlich, discuss our annual summer air travel forecast, and he's also going to review first quarter results for the industry. John will be followed by our Senior Vice President of Safety, Security, and Operations, Tom Hendricks. He's going to discuss summer operations, some of the challenges that airlines deal with, and how the airline industry provides help and assistance to passengers during summer travel. That will be followed by Q&A and for both of our guests, both of our speakers. Our press release is going out as we speak. You'll see the press release, and then also within the press release there will be a link to some additional slides which has data and numbers and statistics that John will be covering on the call. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John Heimlich for some brief remarks.
Thank you and good morning. A4A is pleased to share with you our summer outlook for air travel today. We're projecting slightly fuller flights driven in part by a record number of international travelers. Over the course of the summer, defined as June, July, and August, we expect 206.2 million passengers to travel globally on U.S. airlines, averaging 2.24 million per day. The 206.2 million is comparable to summer 2011, but remains 5% below the peak of 217.6 million in 2007. It includes 26.8 million passengers traveling on international flights, outpacing the record set in 2011 by 2%. On average, flights are expected to be more than 85% full, especially in July. While A4A does not forecast airfares, recently released data from the Department of Transportation show that consumers continued to benefit in 2011 from air travel prices that lag price increases for other U.S. consumer goods and services. From 2000 to 2011, the U.S. Consumer Price Index, the broadest measure of inflation in the economy, rose 31%. Over the same period, average domestic airfares per DOT rose just 9%, or 15% including ancillary services, less than half the rate of U.S. inflation. Accordingly, adjusted for inflation, average domestic airfares actually fell 16% over the period, or 12% including ancillary services. During these 11 years, a year of college tuition, a gallon of gasoline, a dozen eggs, a seat at a Major League Baseball game, a ticket to the movies, a bottle of prescription drugs, all of these experienced increases in prices that dwarfed the change in the price of air travel. In the first quarter of 2012, the average price to fly 1 mile on a U.S. airline rose 6% in domestic markets and 7% in international markets. Shifting to airline financial performance, a tally of results reported by 10 U.S. passenger airlines for the first quarter shows a net loss of $1.73 billion compared to a net loss of $1 billion in the same period of 2011. The net loss this year equates to a negative 5.2% margin, or a loss of 1 nickel for every dollar of airline revenue. An 8.2% year-over-year improvement in operating revenues was more than offset by a 10.3% increase in combined operating and non-operating expenses. The increase in operating expenses was driven primarily by a 19.1% increase in fuel costs and a 4.2% increase in wages and benefits. Fuel constituted 1/3 of operating expenses in the quarter. While the first quarter is typically the most difficult from a seasonal perspective, it is important to note that the results would have been far worse if not for continued steps across the industry to adapt to rising cost pressures and a sluggish economy. Among others, these steps include record operational performance and swift adjustments in seating capacity. Notably, for U.S. airlines, 2011 was the best year ever recorded for baggage handling and denied boardings, while the fourth quarter was the best 4Q ever recorded for on-time arrivals. And these improvements have continued on into 2012. In January, U.S. airlines reported the best industry on-time performance and the lowest rate of mishandled bags for any January recorded by DOT. In February, U.S. airlines reported the best industry on-time performance for any February and the best baggage handling performance for any month ever recorded by DOT. March results are expected to be announced by DOT this coming Monday. And with that, I'd like to turn the mic over to my colleague, Tom Hendricks.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for dialing in today. As a retired airline captain, I would just like to reemphasize that safety is always our top priority, not only of A4A, but all of our member airlines. The work of our member airlines and manufacturers working cooperatively with the government has led to the safest period in aviation history. Our members have refined their operations over the years to ensure they are able to accommodate as many passengers as possible during summer weather disruptions. One of the challenges for airlines in the summer flying season is the increase in passenger demand. To meet this, airlines utilize nearly all of their available aircraft and crew members. Because of this, when schedule disruptions do occur, there tends to be somewhat less flexibility in this high-demand season to fully accommodate all of those impacted by these disruptions. Unlike snowstorms, thunderstorms sometimes develop quickly and can cause large schedule disruptions if located near hub airports or frequently used navigation airways. Airlines still take proactive measures to ensure that the least number of passengers are impacted. Using the best available information, airlines adjust their schedules in advance and accommodate passengers on different flights when aircraft and crews are available. A4A works very closely with the FAA's Systems Command Center to help distribute the most up-to-date information on emerging weather patterns and other events that might impact the national airspace system. On-site A4A staff and key airline leaders conduct nationwide teleconferences every 2 hours and more frequently if needed to ensure that fully collaborative decisions regarding traffic routing are fully vetted with the airline industry. Also, large disruptions can cause effects for several days as aircraft and crews are repositioned to reestablish normal airline schedules as quickly as possible. In doing so, we ensure that carriers are able to minimize inconvenience to customers and, importantly, maximize available planes and crews to accommodate the largest numbers of passengers following any disruptions as quickly as possible following a summer storm. Unlike thunderstorms, hurricanes are largely more predictable, although their impact on the system can be much broader. Airlines and the FAA are very adept at quickly reconfiguring the airspace system to enable the restart of operations as rapidly as possible following the passing of these large weather systems. There are things you can do to make summer travel easier as well. Those tips are on our website, airlines.org. More and more, we encourage passengers to leverage the social media tools available to them and also to utilize their smartphones and electronic devices to receive text messages from airlines as disruptions occur. With that, I'll turn it back to Steve.
Great. Thanks very much, Tom and John. Tina will open it up for questions, please. And for the reporters, please direct your question to either John or Tom, who can talk about the things that they just presented. Thanks.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, via the phone lines, you can press the 1 followed by the 4 on your telephone to register for a question or a comment. You will hear a 3-tone prompt to acknowledge your request. If your question has been answered and you would like to withdraw your registration, please press the 1 followed by the 3. If you're using a speakerphone, please lift your handset before entering your request. One moment, please, for our first question. Our first question comes from Scott Mayerowitz of Associated Press. Please go ahead, sir.
Morning, guys. Thanks for taking the time. Appreciate it. two-part question. First is, do you have any idea where load factors are going to be this summer compared to next summer? And then the other one is, will higher airfares and lower gas prices lead to more people driving than flying this summer?
Sure, Scott. Let's see. When you said next summer, we certainly don't have any...
this summer.
Okay. Well, let me tell you first. Last summer, domestically, we saw domestic load factors ranging from essentially 85 to 87%. Internationally, 85 to 86. And load factors this year have been running up about a point or two domestically, and about a point in Latin and Pacific, and close to 3 points in transatlantic. So I think it's fair to say the high 80s is a reasonable approximation, especially
since it'll be higher.
Yes,
higher than last year.
Yes. We said at the outset we expect planes to be slightly fuller this year. Yes.
Okay.
And if I could add, Scott, this is Tom. An important point that John makes on the load factors is that that's on a system-wide basis. On individual flights in certain markets, you may see 100% load factors. And that's one of the reasons why it can be a challenge to accommodate disruptions in the system out there, is because the ability to reaccommodate with limited crews and limited aircraft is challenging at times in certain markets for the airlines.
Got it. And do you think that the higher airfares and low gas prices are going to cause more people to drive than fly this summer?
Well, in theory, higher energy prices, well, I should say lower energy prices, put disposable income back in consumers' pockets, giving them more money to spend on discretionary items like air travel. So that would bode well in our favor if motorists are banking on that to last through the summer. And our forecast is based on the predication that much of summer travel is booked up at this point, and we're quite confident, based on the volumes that we're projecting, that the modest increase in fares is not deterring travelers.
Great. Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. As a reminder, you can press the 1 followed by the 4 if you would like to register a question or a comment. That is the 1 followed by the 4. Our next question comes from John Hughes of Bloomberg. Please go ahead, sir.
Hello, gentlemen. How are you?
Good, thank you.
John.
So, John Heimlich, I wanted to get your analysis on fuel costs in the current quarter or looking ahead. What do you see on the fuel front?
Well, the U.S. Energy Information Administration is projecting the highest summer average for jet fuel prices in its history. And although I don't have that number in history, I looked at their short-term forecast, and it is a new record. And as I said, jet fuel prices year-to-date, John, are running about 7 to 8% higher than the same period in 2011, which is important to note because calendar year 2011 was an all-time high for spot jet fuel prices. So it's clearly been a challenge, which translated in part to the 19% increase in fuel expenditures in the first quarter. Clearly a challenge, which has resulted in carriers incrementally announcing scale-backs to their capacity plans for the year.
Right. Do we expect that to continue all the way through the year, or sort of how far out does our snapshot take us?
I only looked at the EIA data through the summer, but I don't expect a significant change from last year. It seems like the risk is to higher fuel prices rather than lower, and we don't do energy price forecasts ourselves.
Okay. And what about airline profitability, in the second quarter or looking forward to later this year? What should we look for in that regard?
Well, all I can say is that the Wall Street analyst consensus is much more sanguine on the full year than it was for the first quarter. As I mentioned, the first quarter is typically the weakest, and the second quarter is typically the strongest. Wall Street is expecting most carriers to report modest profitability in 2012. Bear in mind that in 2011, that was a fairly narrow margin of 0.3%.
Okay.
I think the expectation outpaced that this year.
Okay. And I guess I'll ask one more before I hand it over, and I wanted to get Tom Hendricks in there. On the operational front, Tom, I guess we can't really prognosticate what kind of summer we might have storm-wise, because that would seem to be the biggest factor in whether you're going to have difficulty out there or not in the field, right?
Yeah, that's a very good point, John. And we've actually had what I would consider to be the previous two summers relatively calm from a convective weather activity perspective. It's very unpredictable. It depends on many factors. And in some regards, while we have improved our forecasting ability, it's still a great challenge for thunderstorms in particular, because as you know, they can develop very rapidly and dissipate very rapidly. And depending on where that occurs, can cause large disruptions. If there's very good indications that some of this activity is imminent, then airlines will very rapidly adjust their schedules so they can get back to the full flying schedules that they've laid out as quickly as possible. But these unplanned, unforecast, or forecasts being less than what actually occurred can cause disruptions in the summer that could take a couple of days to recover from on an individual market basis. The system recovers very quickly, but if we have large disruptions at New York JFK, Chicago O'Hare, Atlanta, through this type of activity, it could take a couple of days to reaccommodate passengers due to the very high load factors.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, as a reminder, you can press the 1 followed by the 4 to register a question. And our next question comes from Aaron Karp of Air Transport World. One moment, please. Please go ahead, sir.
Hello, how are you guys doing?
Good, thanks, Darren.
Good morning.
If you look at the picture that you presented with airlines, it didn't make money in the first quarter, yet the load factors are high and fare increases haven't deterred passengers, and the fare increases are lagging the other consumer goods. Doesn't that lead to the conclusion that airfares are simply too low and that the airlines should be jacking up the fares more?
Well, Aaron, you always say one man's revenue problem is another man's cost problem, and you really have to look at the entire income statement. And we went from probably a period of one-time restructuring to a period where restructuring is ongoing and it's religion, and there's no part of the business that you leave unaddressed. So whether something is 1% of your cost structure or 35% of your cost structure, or a small fraction or large fraction of your revenues, I think airlines are continually looking across the board at ways to deal with those challenges. So there are many levers one could press. There have been some airfare increase attempts this year, but I think you'll note that not all of those were successful. So that's been one of several levers several airlines have tried to pull, but there's a tremendous amount of attention being paid to the cost side as well.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you. And our next question comes from Joan Harris of ABC News Radio. Please go ahead.
Oh, hello, gentlemen. I'm sorry, I was put on the call late, so I missed the top of what John said about, I assume that it was about you're expecting planes to be slightly fuller. If you could just repeat that because it's radio, and we'll get that on tape.
Sure. I said we're projecting slightly fuller flights, driven in part by a record number of international travelers, and that over the course of the summer, we expect 206.2 million passengers to travel globally on U.S. airlines, averaging 2.24 million per day. and that total for the summer is comparable to last summer, but remains 5% below the peak of $217.6 million in 2007.
Okay. And any particular reason why you're expecting a bump this summer because of fuel prices or what?
Well, the bump in load factors, I assume you're referring to?
Well, no. Why?
Because the total volumes will be comparable to last summer. Where we're seeing a bump is in the amount of international travel. And, we have a relatively mature domestic market. We have relatively, an economy that is growing, but growing at lower than many people have wished or expected. And there are certain international markets that are not only growing faster than the United States, but there the U.S. airlines benefit from economies and travelers on both sides of the ocean. And we know from Department of Commerce data that U.S. citizen outbound travel in the first couple months of the year has been up significantly, especially to particular continents.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lott. There are no further questions at this time, so I'll turn the conference back over to you.
Okay, thanks very much, and thanks to everybody for joining the call this morning. Again, we will continue to do these quarterly economic briefings to provide insight and perspective on the industry. The press release has gone out, which has the slides linked to that press release, which has all the data and statistics that John covered this morning on the call. And if you have anything else, feel free to call A4A Communications. Thanks very much, and we'll talk to you soon.
Ladies and gentlemen, that does conclude the conference call for today. We thank you for your participation and ask that you please disconnect all lines. Thank you and have a good day.